It's called to be a preacher.
My goodness.
So I was called to be a preacher. And he just hugged me and just cried. And so,
For decades, his name was synonymous with something sacred, a voice so powerful it could silence a room. Songs so honest they could break people open and put them back together in the same breath. Donnie McClurkin wasn't just a gospel artist, he was a testimony set to music. A living reminder that the most shattered lives can still produce the most beautiful sound. But today, something has shifted. Lawsuits, public accusations, allegations that have left longtime supporters stunned and searching for answers. The man who once sang about healing is now standing at the center of a storm, unlike anything he has faced before. So what really happened? And is this the end of everything he built? Or is there something more to this story? Stay with us. From pain to purpose. Donnie McClurkin grew up in Copiague, and from his earliest years, life gave him very little reason to hope. He was just a child when the losses began, the kind of losses that don't just hurt, they hollow you out. When Donnie was 8 years old, his family suffered a tragedy that no words can soften. His 2-year-old brother was struck and killed by a speeding car, gone in an instant. The grief that followed didn't just affect him, it moved through the entire family like a slow earthquake, cracking everything it touched. But the pain didn't stop there. During those same fragile years, Donnie became a victim of abuse at the hands of his great-uncle. Later, more abuse came, this time from his great-uncle's son. The emotional damage ran deep, cutting wounds that would take years to even begin to understand. And while he was quietly carrying all of that weight, 2 of his sisters were struggling with substance abuse, adding another layer of heartbreak to a household already stretched to its limits. He needed somewhere to breathe. He found it in the church. Inside those walls, something lifted. Music became the language that said what nothing else could. Prayer gave him a place to put the weight down for a moment. And watching his aunt, who sang background vocals for gospel legend Andraé Crouch, planted a seed that would eventually grow into one of the most decorated careers in gospel music history. As a teenager, Donnie began shaping that passion into something real. He formed the McClurkin Singers, then built the New York Restoration Choir, which was already recording by the 1970s. 3 albums came out of that chapter before he ever stepped into the spotlight alone. Each one carried the emotional fingerprint of everything he had lived through. In the late 1980s, Marvin Winans brought him on as an associate minister at Perfecting Church in Detroit. That partnership lasted more than a decade and shaped him not just as a musician, but as a leader. Then came the diagnosis that could have ended it all. In the early 1990s, Donnie began experiencing sharp pain, swelling, and internal bleeding. Doctors confirmed it was leukemia. The condition was serious, treatment was strongly advised, but at 31 years old, standing at what felt like the edge of everything, Donnie made a choice that would define him. He turned to the same faith he had been preaching and decided to trust it completely. His recovery became one of the most powerful testimonies of his life. Years later, in the early 2000s, Marvin Winans officially ordained him and sent him out to plant Perfecting Faith Church in Freeport. Donnie McClurkin was now a senior pastor, a husband to his congregation, a shepherd to a community. But what did his personal family look like? And did it reflect the life he proclaimed from the pulpit? Stay with us. A quiet love story. Donnie McClurkin has always guarded his private life carefully. For someone who has spent decades performing before enormous crowds and sharing some of the most vulnerable parts of his story on stage, he drew a firm line around certain things. His romantic life was one of them. That made the headlines of 2016 feel all the more surprising. Reports began circulating that Donnie was romantically involved with Nicole C. Mullen, a gospel singer widely celebrated for her powerful vocals and sincere faith. For fans of both artists, the news carried a kind of warmth. 2 people who had each walked through real pain, both devoted to their faith, finding something together. Their joint appearance on Praise the Lord, the faith-based television program on Trinity Broadcasting Network, hosted by A.R. Bernard, only added fuel to the excitement. Viewers saw something that felt genuine between them. Speculation about a possible engagement, even a quiet wedding, spread quickly through gospel circles. But Nicole eventually stepped forward on social media and clarified what was actually true. Yes, they had been together. No, they were not married. The statement cooled the rumors significantly. By the time Donnie appeared on TV1's Unsung in 2021, his version of events had shifted even further. He stated that he and Nicole had never been in a serious long-term relationship at all. For many people who had followed the story closely for years, that revelation landed hard. Still, his identity as a father has remained one of the clearest constants in his personal life. His biological son Matthew was born in the year 2000, and not long after, Donnie made a decision that quietly said a great deal about who he was. He adopted a 9-year-old girl named Michelle, just 1 year after Matthew's birth. Opening his home to a child who needed one was not something he announced with fanfare. It was simply something he did. The music that moved the world. Donnie McClurkin's musical legacy did not arrive by accident. It was built song by song, album by album, over years of work that blended raw honesty with extraordinary vocal power. The real turning point came in the mid-1990s. A relationship with a Warner Alliance executive opened the door to a record deal, and in 1996, Donnie released his self-titled debut album. Producers on the project included Bill Maxwell, Mark Kibble of Take Six, Cedric Caldwell, Victor Caldwell, and Andre Crouch, a lineup that reflected both Donnie's roots and his ambitions. The song that would define that era was Stand. It spread through churches, radio stations, and gospel communities with a kind of quiet force. Its message that staying upright during life's hardest seasons is itself an act of faith hit something real in people. When Oprah Winfrey praised the album publicly, the doors swung wide open. The project went gold. A new audience found Donnie McClurkin, and they stayed. What followed was a run of gospel chart success that few artists in the genre have matched. We Fall Down became a staple of Sunday worship services worldwide. His album Live in London and More climbed toward double platinum. At the Grammy Awards, he took home the prize for Best Traditional Soul Gospel Album for psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Recognition from the industry that his work had reached a level beyond trend or season. More albums followed in the years after. Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs in the mid-2000s, then We All Are One, Live in Detroit. Both moved strongly on the Billboard charts. In 2014, the collaborative project Duets brought him together with Erica Campbell, Tina Campbell, Fred Hammond, John P. Key, Dorinda Clark Cole, Tremaine Hawkins, Israel Houghton, and Ty Tribbett. 2 years later, the journey debuted at #1 on the Billboard Top Gospel Albums chart. Songs like Speak to My Heart, Great Is Your Mercy, and Stand appeared in live performance, reminding listeners why these songs had never really left. His connection to audiences reached across borders as well. During live performances, Donnie regularly included language medleys in Japanese, Russian, Spanish, and Dutch, a deliberate choice to make gospel music feel global rather than contained. In 2025, the single Better After While arrived, recorded live at Trinity Broadcasting Network studios, climbing into the top 10 on the Billboard Hot Gospel Songs chart and leading the Gospel Airplay chart. A final studio album, titled Finally, was announced to follow. Then, also in 2025, Donnie stepped back from the music industry entirely to focus on ministry. A chapter closed, but another storm was still forming. Here are the 3 sections expanded by 25%, with all core details preserved. The miracles that kept him here. Before the controversies, before the lawsuits, before the public scrutiny that now surrounds his name, there were moments that should have ended Donnie McClurkin's story altogether. Moments so close to the edge that survival itself felt like something beyond ordinary explanation. In 2018, He was driving when he suddenly lost consciousness behind the wheel. The vehicle crashed. The situation by any measure was dangerous. Not a minor incident that could be quickly forgotten, but a serious, life-threatening event that unfolded without warning. When news of the accident began spreading online, thousands of people feared the worst. He survived. His social media accounts were flooded with prayers, messages of love, and words of relief from fans, family, ministry partners, and people he had never met, but who felt they knew him through his music. Church members reached out. Fellow gospel artists shared their support. For Donnie himself, walking away from that crash became another layer of his testimony. Another moment where the story of his life could have stopped, but did not. Years before the accident, of course, there had been the leukemia, the pain and swelling and internal bleeding that led to a diagnosis no one wants to hear. Doctors pushed hard for immediate treatment, making clear the condition was serious. Donnie pushed back with faith. At 31 years old, he held on to the belief that God would carry him through, leaning into the same convictions he had been preaching to others for years. His recovery later became one of the defining miracles of his life, a testimony he returned to again and again from pulpits and stages around the world. Through everything, the childhood trauma, the sickness, the car crash, Donnie continued to speak about what he had survived. And people listened, not because his story was polished, but because it was real. His music carried weight because listeners understood that it hadn't been written from comfort. It had been written from the bottom of real experience, shaped by real pain, and offered back to the world as something that could still bring hope. Across countless churches and gospel gatherings, people shared how his songs had lifted them out of grief, how a sermon had helped restore something broken inside them, how his voice, arriving in the middle of a painful season, had reminded them they were not carrying their burden alone. For many, Donnie McClurkin's life itself was the most powerful song he ever sang. A living testimony set to music. A story that kept refusing to end. But being a public figure in ministry and music means very little stays hidden forever. The controversies. The first major storm arrived in 2002. During an interview with a Christian publication, Donnie spoke openly about personal struggles connected to homosexuality. He explained that the abuse he suffered as a child and his early exposure to explicit material during those vulnerable years had deeply affected his emotional development and created confusion that followed him into adulthood. He described turning to faith, prayer, and spiritual guidance as part of his personal journey through those struggles. The response was immediate and sharply divided. Some people admired his willingness to be honest about deeply personal territory that many public figures would never touch. Others strongly disagreed with the way he framed his experience and the conclusions he drew from it. The debate didn't stay inside church walls. It moved into public discourse and followed him for years. In 2008, his name appeared in connection with events tied to Barack Obama's presidential campaign. When his past comments resurfaced, public backlash came swiftly. He was removed from the official performance lineup connected to campaign events. Though he still appeared at one concert during that period, the damage to his public image in certain communities had already taken root. In 2013, he was originally invited to take part in the 50th anniversary commemoration of the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. After pressure from activists and organizers, the invitation was withdrawn. His comments were cited directly as the reason. Then, when the United States Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in the middle of the 2010s, Donnie spoke out publicly against the ruling, standing firmly in his religious convictions. The response followed the same familiar pattern: deep admiration from supporters, sharp condemnation from critics who felt his words caused real harm. But what came in 2026 was different in kind from anything that had come before. A former personal assistant named Giuseppe Corletto filed a lawsuit against Donnie in Manhattan Supreme Court. According to the complaint, Corletto had first encountered Donnie through his autobiography and later became his assistant, working closely alongside him for several years. The lawsuit included serious allegations: violation assault, violation battery, and deeply inappropriate behavior, which the filing claimed occurred during private spiritual counseling sessions, church-related settings, and work-related travel over an extended period of time. The lawsuit also referenced an alleged email in which Donnie was said to have apologized for his conduct, a detail that added significant weight to the accusations. Donnie's legal team denied everything. His attorney stated publicly that the allegations were completely false, that Donnie had never engaged in the conduct described, and that the lawsuit fundamentally misrepresented the nature of their relationship across the years they worked together. For many longtime supporters, the situation created deep and painful uncertainty. They waited for legal facts to emerge while grappling with what it would mean if the claims proved true. For others, the accusations alone had already shifted something they thought they understood about the man behind the music. It became one of the most consequential public moments of his entire career. A life of purpose. Through all of it, the music, the miracles, the ministry, and the controversies, Donnie McClurkin built something lasting, something that, whatever the future holds, cannot be easily erased from gospel music history. His net worth is estimated at around $5 million, accumulated through decades of album sales, live concert performances, and pastoral ministry at Perfecting Faith Church in Freeport, where he served as senior pastor. Songs like Stand and We Fall Down stayed on rotation in churches, on gospel radio stations, and on streaming platforms long after their initial releases, continuing to reach new listeners in new seasons of life. His concerts drew large and diverse crowds, people from different backgrounds and generations who came not just for the music, but for what it represented. A voice that had survived enough to mean every word it sang. But those who knew him longest often said the same thing. The chart positions, the Grammy recognition, the financial success, none of that was the point. What Donnie pursued was harder to quantify. He invested in young gospel artists still finding their footing. He gave platforms to people who hadn't found their own voices yet. He spoke honestly about addiction within his family, about the abuse he endured in childhood, about what it means to keep believing when the ground beneath you keeps shifting. He mentored, he preached, he showed up in the quiet, unglamorous corners of ministry that never make headlines. He maintained a lifestyle more modest than his fame might have suggested, grounded in faith, in community, and in daily commitment to others. Now, standing in the middle of a lawsuit that has placed everything under new scrutiny, the question hanging over all of it is the same one his entire life keeps returning to. What remains when everything has been tested? Donnie McClurkin built his story on the conviction that broken things can still be made whole, that the worst chapters don't have to be the final ones. Whether that same grace applies to the chapter he is living through right now, that remains to be seen. But the voice is still there, and for millions of people, so is the music. If this story moved you, like and subscribe, and check out the next video on your screen.